Hello, welcome to Planetary Evolution, a place to discuss our path to peace and consciousness. I'm your host, Jared Angaza. I want to talk about racism and the Black Lives Matter movement. I think there is a common misperception about what racism actually is. Let's start here. In 2006 or so, I read a book called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. I'm a huge fan, have been for a long time and ever since. So he talks about in that book how we are programmed as individuals and then certainly collectively as a society to react a certain way to certain races, to certain situations and everything else. He covers all of that. But specifically, he covers a part about race and how we have a certain reaction to a black man or a Mexican man or a white man, if you're black or Mexican or whatever. Certain races have certain stereotypes attached to them. And as a society, we sort of contribute to and foster those misperceptions that ultimately end up as stereotypes. Racism, in my opinion, is not to be confused with hate. People think that if you say, "Oh, that person's a racist," it's like, "Oh my God, are you serious? Do they belong to the Ku Klux Klan? Do they have a cross burning in their yard? Do they throw a brick through someone's window?" No, it may be as simple as just a simple discrimination or a simple feeling that they have that says, "Oh, I wouldn't hire this person because of this," or "I don't hang out with these people because of that," or whatever. And 9 times out of 10, I'd say 99% of the time, it is subconscious. It's on a subconscious level. It's that mild racism that really continues the big thrust of racism that we're experiencing today. It's moderate America. I believe that what we're talking about here is our reflex responses that is based in programming, and it may be very, very, very subtle. I don't think it's actually that much more complicated than that. Let me look at the Webster's Dictionary says, racism is a belief that race is the primary determinant of a human trait and capacity, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Or number 2, racial prejudice or discrimination. That continues to say this is about programming. This is about this is about reflex responses to certain things. If you, for instance, wince a bit when you see a couple of black dudes get out of a pimped out Chrysler and you have a certain reaction, you clutch your bag a little bit more, you look for your wallet. That is a programmed reaction that is based in fear. And it's something that is subconscious, and you may have no noticeable physical reaction, outward reaction at all. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist there in your mind. And I don't think that makes you a bad person. It doesn't. It means that it's time to examine some of the influences that have come into your life and the programming that has resulted from that, and the reaction that you had inside. And to just say, as a good human being, that's not a reaction I want to have. Perhaps I should examine that. Perhaps I should spend more time with the black community. Perhaps I should read more about the history of how things got this way in the first place. It doesn't have to be so antagonistic. It doesn't have to be so angst-filled, this discussion about racism. It should be very, I think, matter of fact. It's like, this is what's happening, and this is what we could do to change that. And as a society that should be evolving into love, in my opinion, that seems very relevant. Here's a question for you. Black Lives Matter. First of all, I'd have to ask you if you agree with the statement, and I think most people just say, yes, of course, Black Lives Matter. But at the end of the day, do you feel that movement is necessary? Do you believe that racism is actually a problem still that exists in the United States? I could rattle off tons and tons and tons of statistics, but you obviously have a computer, so you can go ahead and Google that and find all kinds of statistics that back up the fact that racism is still thriving in America. But again, you have to be aware that there's a problem in order to engage properly in the conversation. And I think that if you don't recognize that there is a race problem, then you might need to check that. I think that a lot of people resist the idea of acknowledging that it's a problem because it sort of implies a certain amount of responsibility on your part, or it might make you just feel guilty. Does Black Lives Matter movement seem necessary or unnecessary to you? Do you wish that it wasn't coming up all the time? Do you wish that your favorite celebrities weren't talking about it, in acceptance speeches and on videos that they post on Facebook and things like that? Do you wish that your friends and family would stop posting about it? And do you get tired of seeing the constant coverage in the news and so on and so on? If so, why do you feel that way? I think that a lot of modern America just says, hey, look, we abolished slavery back in the day. We had Jim Crow, era that happened, and then we had the civil rights movement. This has been taken care of. MLK nipped that one in the bud. We need to move on. Come on, people. And I think people say, look, I have nothing against black people. I have black friends. I have this, I have whatever. But then they also say, and I don't think that racism is even a problem in the United States. I see a conflict there in that perspective. And I think that's very, very common, especially in middle class, white, moderate America. If you don't recognize that it is a problem and that it's still thriving in the US, I think it shows that you've closed your mind a bit to what's actually happening around you. It doesn't mean that you're, again, KKK supporter. It could be subtle. It probably is subtle. I think that is what MLK talked a lot about with his moderate white America discussions. It doesn't mean you're blatantly racist, but subtly apathetic is what makes this wave continue to go on, that subtle apathy of the United States. So African Americans, if you want to look at the beginning of this, they were brought here on ships for the purpose of slavery. They weren't slaves brought here. They were people that were brought here to be enslaved. People just like you and me. They just happen to be from Africa. In this case, we say black. And then on December 6, 1865, I believe that the 13th Amendment was passed to abolish slavery all those years later. So we abolished slavery. Okay, it's done. No more slavery, no more racist stuff. But wait, 98 years later, 1954 to 68, the civil rights movement was going on because MLK and Rosa Parks and scores of others came together and said, racism is still a huge, huge problem in America that we have to address. And for a decade or so, it continued to be a force that was very necessary. I believe that it was very necessary. So 48 years later now, and this really kicked off a few years ago with Ferguson, I think, in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement. But right now, we're 48 years later, after the kind of the official end of the civil rights movement. Why do we need another one? Why do we need another civil rights movement? Come on, people, we've already dealt with this. Either the civil rights movement was important or it wasn't, because remember, we already abolished slavery. But then we had to address the idea of a further kind of umbrella of racism. So we said, okay, let's have the civil rights movement. We have that. That's all beautiful. We can look back at that and say, that was important. That was wonderful. We love MLK. We love his speeches. We love all that stuff. But come on, do we really need the Black Lives Matter movement? Geez, people, you just feel, entitled, or when is enough enough? And that's the kind of thinking that I'm hearing from other people all the time. And I'm blown away by that. I'm just thinking, do you not recognize that this is still a problem? We have institutionalized racism in America, and it's this entrenched programming that we're still dealing with. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is saying we still have entrenched programming that we need to deal with. It is exactly that. So either these movements were important because, or not, because the Black Lives Matter movement is just, in my mind, somewhat of a continuation of the civil rights sentiment. And it's saying pretty much the same thing, is that we need to continue this discussion. And in regards to the recent and rather rampant shootings over the last few years of black people by police, I don't see that certainly as a reflection that the racism problem has been fixed. And I also don't see it as a problem with the black community or with police. That is not the problem. The problem is that our perspective, nationally in this case, is still rooted in fear. And that fear fosters that division. And it fosters more fear, and it makes police officers come up to a black person ready to shoot because they're scared of what might happen because they've been programmed to be scared. and society and the media, most at fault, continues to compound that thinking and continues to support that thinking. It takes a lot to reprogram yourself, to reprogram another individual, and certainly to reprogram a nation. It's going to take time. It's going to take continued efforts. Maybe peace and equality, aren't important enough to us right now, and it should be more important. I think that we can agree that I hope that racism is still in existence here, and that that we continue to need reprogramming. I mean, is the Black Lives Matter movement important? Is it a bad idea? I mean, even if you're not like totally on board, I mean, is it a bad idea? I don't think that it is. They're petitioning for equality, just saying equality, just equal, not more, but equal. Isn't that reasonable? So you're either saying, look, you already have equal rights, which isn't true, or this movement is still relevant and important. I think that, well, let me address another thing. There's this other idea that's coming out that says all lives matter, or blue lives matter. Anyway, all lives matter. Great, yes. And when we say Black Lives Matter, that is a reminder that Black is part of that all. It is not saying more important than other people. It is saying equally important, all. All lives matter. Yes, we agree. Black Lives Matter. People would agree that all lives matter. That is the point. You don't go in and just diffuse it by saying, no, everyone matters. Agreed. But right now, it's the Black community that is continuing to be oppressed. So we need a reminder that we are all equal. I find that whole idea, that whole sentiment of all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter to be extremely ignorant. And definitely offensive. It's really it's a reflection of that pervasive perspective, I think, that of people saying that racism isn't actually a problem. That you're saying, when you say all lives matter, you're saying racism isn't a problem in the United States. That's a bummer, to say the least. Yes, all lives matter. And Black Lives Matter. Black lives need, I think, more attention right now because that situation is on fire. Black Lives Matter is a reminder, not an accusation. It's not some offensive thing to say. It's just saying, hey, remember, we're all in this together. We're all interconnected. We're all humans. And until that is playing out regularly in society, I think we're going to continue to need movements to remind people. I don't know why the idea of the discussion of racism makes people want to put up their dukes, put up their defenses. Are people just tired of hearing about it, or what? Are they tired of... well, I guess my question is this. This is my question. Why are people not more tired of rampant racism and institutionalized racism in our country than they are of seeing Black Lives Matter hashtags in posts on social networks? Why is that more uncomfortable and offensive than the reason that it exists, which is that we still have that entrenched fear that causes and fosters division? And yes, the programming is on both sides, all races. We created that. We're fostering that, all of us. I think that what makes sense is that we continue to exponentially push for equality. That should be an exponential game, not a cut and dry, like, okay, we did that and it's over, we move on. I mean, it'd be great if that could happen, but that's not how humans work. At the end of the day, if you are truly committed to being love, and that means to all humans, not just ones that make you feel comfortable, I think it's a good exercise to examine your subconscious programming, to think about how that plays out day to day. Not just for certain races, but for all races. For the purpose of saying, look, I think that peace, which is what happens when you have equality, is important, not just for me and my comfortable white American life, but for everyone, because I recognize that we all are interconnected. I think that it's important for you to be part of this discussion, or to allow it to flow, not to resist it. And again, it doesn't mean you have to go down to a rally and carry a sign. It means examine yourself, examine your own thoughts, examine your family nucleus. How does that look? How do you guys respond to race? Is it healthy? We're wise enough to understand what that may look like. And then if you want to be involved, be more involved. And if you want to amplify that, amplify it. If you want to, and at the end of the day, stop saying all lives matter, because that's just offensive. Of course all lives matter. And right now, it's important to remember that the Black community is part of that all lives scenario. If you think this is important, I hope you'll support Black Lives Matter in whatever way makes you feel comfortable, or whatever way that you feel led to do, compelled to do. And I hope that you will continue to constantly analyze your subconscious thinking and to ensure that you are focused on love and focused on equality. I, as a lifetime activist, specifically for racial and economic equality, continue to analyze my gut reactions, my flinch, my immediate reaction to certain races and certain people groups and things like that, so that I'm not judging and I'm not falling into stereotypical type behavior and fostering stereotypes. I think it's important for all of us. I think that this movement is important for everyone, and it benefits everyone. I hope you're thriving, and I wish you strength and peace as you evolve into love.